Dear learners, in this literary forms, the important genre is fiction, and in fiction, we have already discussed novel and various types of novels. Now, we'll be discussing today stories and its types, right? So, there is basically very little difference between a story and a novel. A novel is a story which is extensive, very large story, which is told uh, in a very elaborate manner. So, on the other hand, a story also is a narrative. Both are basically narratives, and uh, so let's discuss what are different types of stories. So let's start. Right. So, in fiction, we have short story and novel. So, let us first discuss what is fiction. So, fiction means something which is imaginative, okay, uh, totally imaginative. May have some elements of, you know, uh, reality, but it is totally imaginative. And creative non-fiction means which is mostly factual, which is fact based. So this is the difference between fiction and non-fiction. Fiction is mostly imaginative, while creative non-fiction is mostly factual. Though there cannot be a non-fiction without some facts in it, and there cannot also be a non-fiction without some kind of fiction in it. So basically, even when people are writing about themselves, like autobiographical stories, then they try to hide something, or sometimes they try to exaggerate. So that is why both overlap sometimes. But however, generally speaking, we will call a work, a narrative work, a creative fiction when it is mostly imaginative, though it may have some factual elements also. On the other hand, we will describe non-fiction as mostly factual, fact-based. Okay, so non-fiction is known for its fidelity to facts, but as I told you, that no fictional work is totally imaginative and unreal, and no non-fictional work is totally factual and real. So there is a mixing, because when people are using or writing non-fiction, so they may use certain real incidents, or something which is fact-based. Similarly, when people write non-fictional work, so they fantasize, they try to hide something, try to exaggerate, so it may not be totally factual and real. So there is that is why it is written mostly, right? So this is the difference between fiction and non-fiction, right? Okay, and this is what I told you. People, even when you write your memoirs, you try to exaggerate or hide or invent many things. So now let us discuss the difference between popular fiction versus literary fiction. What is the difference between popular fiction and literary fiction? So popular fiction, though it is not very easy to distinguish between these two, because they overlap many times. However, a purely literary fiction is free from any formula, and it is largely serious and experimental. On the other hand, popular fiction, it is a formula fiction. You can call it a kind of romance, type of love and adventure, uh, being the most common themes, and is written with the view of its market value. So if it sells, then it is successful. If it doesn't sell, then it is a failure. So this is what uh, popular fiction is. Then a literary work is not subject to market forces, right? A literary classic may not be the bestseller. So this is the difference between literary fiction and popular fiction. So just as summing up, uh, literary fiction is free from any formula, and it is serious and experimental, and it is not subject to the market forces. Okay, so a literary classic may not be the bestseller. On the other hand, popular fiction, basically has an element of popularity, and that means uh, it has a market value, and if it sells, then it's successful, and it has got a formula, basic formula also, that is a kind of romance, that is love and adventure. Okay, so this is the difference between literary fiction and popular fiction. Now let us define what is short story. So short story is a short fictional composition. Okay, then it concentrates, because it is very short, it may be of 1 2 pages, or maybe 10 20, or at the most 100 pages. So it concentrates on one thing, one theme, and tells it intensely, right? So it has many similarities with the novel, uh, but now, story and novel, they are independent genres, and in short story also, the action is organized into a pattern, and uh, in a pattern, so as to create a specific effect on the audience. That means the plot that creates a specific effect on the audience. The effect may be comic, tragic, or maybe satiric or romantic. Okay, so that is how the plots or the action is arranged, okay, organized. Then one more feature of a good story is it has got a surprise ending. Okay, there is a delightful shock or surprise at the end. Okay, so then basically we read in, stories and novels for pleasure, and maybe instruction also. So this is short story, right? So then here also we have two different kinds of stories. One is a traditional one, another is a modern story. So what is the difference between the traditional and modern story? So traditional story, it follows a plot structure. Everything moves in a chronological manner, in an order. There's beginning, middle, and end. On the other hand, the modern story does not follow any plot or characterization of the traditional story. It is sometimes it is plotless, and there is no specific beginning, middle, or end. While a traditional story will have a plot, will have that characterization, it will also have that beginning, middle, and end, and the characters in traditional story, they undergo a kind of change or development, so they are not same as they were in the beginning of the story. So there is a change. However, in modern story, there is no visible development, be it physical or moral or psychological. So they are shown in flashes. The characters are developed in flashes, right? So the modern story, that the events are not necessarily in a logical order or in a chronological order, and it may not tell you the all the things. It may keep certain things secret, or hide things, and leave them to the open imagination of the readers. So that is how this modern story is different from the traditional story. So just summing up, while a traditional story follows particular, it has got a compact plot. That means it has a beginning, middle, and end. Then the characterization is also proper in a traditional story, and the characters are developed during the advancement of plot or the course of the story. So there is a change in the characters in traditional story. However, in modern story, no such things are followed. It may not have a plot. That means the story may not have a specific beginning, middle, or end. And then the characters, they may look similar as they were in the beginning of the story. That means there is no change, any kind of development in their behavior. in their character during the course of the story, and they are shown in flashes, right? And it may not have a definite ending. It may have an open ending, okay, leaving it to the imagination of the readers, okay, to comprehend themselves. So this is the difference between traditional and modern stories. Now we'll discuss types of stories which are based on their themes. They can be divided into these types. First is the story of incident. The story of incident, as we discussed in novels also, the novel of incident. Here, the focus is on the event or the incident. The character is secondary, and the main focus is on the event. For example, the detective stories of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the tales of detection, adventure stories. So here the focus is on the event or on the incident rather than on the character. Okay. Then story of character. So here, the our interest is in the main character, his state of mind and his motivation, his or her. So here incident is or event is secondary. So it has a bare minimum plot, and there is no significant incidents. And examples are Anton Chekhov's and Ernest Hemingway's stories. So this is the basic difference between two types of stories: the stories of incident and story of character. Then we have other types also based on their themes. That is romantic, adventure, and supernatural stories. We will take up first. Romantic, adventure, and supernatural stories. Romantic stories, as the name itself suggests, they have a romantic theme. Romantic means something which is remote, something which is imaginative, and basically they are love stories. And with that formula, boy meets the girl, and then the story starts. So they may not be necessarily love stories, they may be adventure stories also, but they are set in remote romantic places. So that is why they are called romantic stories. Next is adventure stories. Adventure stories, relate to the incidents to show how the protagonist goes on an adventurous journey in search of something, someone, or something precious or lost, and how he or she overcomes the various difficulties or hurdles that stand in his way or come in his way. So these are adventure stories, which basically narrate the adventures of the protagonist who is on a mission. Okay. The next is supernatural stories. Supernatural stories, they are set in a different world than ours. They have supernatural characters like the ghosts or the fairies who are there. And many children's stories use fairies, which take children's imagination to that romantic, beautiful place, remote, beautiful place. And sometimes they may also be very, horrifying stories where you have demons and ghosts. So these are called supernatural stories, which have supernatural elements in them: talking trees, walking mountains, and ghosts, fairies, demons. Okay. So all these are supernatural stories. The next is fables. You might have heard about the Panchatantra stories and Aesop's fables. So fable is nothing but a short story that teaches a moral lesson. So the stories from the Panchatantra uh, are called, they're basically fables, and they have been very popular over the years, over the ages. Basically, animal fable stories with the animals as characters. Uh, those who speak and teach us a lesson. So they are basically allegories to convey some useful moral lesson. and they are really liked by the children, small children, very much. So uh, that's what Fable is. Okay, then realistic stories, which are real, related to real life as we live, and there is nothing fantastic in these stories. For example, Henry's stories are mostly realistic. Similarly, R.K. Narayan, he has also written realistic stories. Okay, so this is uh, the next type, that is realistic stories. Now we'll discuss postmodernist stories. Postmodernist stories, as we learnt in the beginning also, that these are experimental stories. Their technique is different. They do not follow a traditional plot. The characterization is minimum. Okay, in characters they are shown in flashes. So there is a difference in how these postmodernist stories they are written. For example, the stories written by James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and Samuel Beckett are they write such stories, the postmodernist stories. So they are quite complex, and as there is no plot, no traditional plot in the traditional sense. Okay, they have a plot, but this plot is not the same as the traditional plot, and that's why these stories appear to be complex, because basically they show the psychological uh, conflict and the characters. There is little or no outward action, right? So they are really difficult to understand, these postmodernist stories. For example, James Joyce Evelyn is, you can quote it as an example of postmodernist stories. Here, Evelyn, who is the protagonist, she is shown trapped between her wish to escape from her boring life and a life with her suitor, whose name is Frank. Okay, so the story ends on showing her emotional turmoil or emotional conflict, and which is open to many interpretations. So there is no definite ending, and the reader is left to guess for himself. Okay, or to it is left to the imagination of the reader. So about postmodernist stories. Now we'll discuss plot in a story. Plot, as you know, we have already discussed in novel. Plot means how the action moves, the sequence of events in a story, that is called plot. And a traditional plot has a beginning, middle, and end. Beginning is called exposition. Then there are complications, and characters are developed, that is results in the rising action. And then the tension or the interest is highest, that means the climax. And then slowly this tension is released, there is resolution, the falling action resulting in resolution, the end, where if it may be happy or tragic. So similarly, the stories also have a plot, and in traditional stories there is a well knit plot. It has got a proper beginning, middle, and end, and the course of action is well directed, to achieve a comic, satiric, or tragic effect as the story progresses towards this logical end. And the incidents are narrated in chronological orders. Chronological means what happened first, and then next, the next, the next. So chronology is something, there came morning, then afternoon, then evening, and night. This is chronological order. एंड स्टोरी जो है वो बीच में भी शुरू हो सकती है, इट मे बिगिन इन द मिडल, और एंड में भी शुरू हो सकती है, राइट. सो देन the plot in modern story or postmodern story is entirely different from the traditional plot. In fact, traditional plot does not exist in the modern story. So how the modern story writer tells the story, it is through flashes, or what do you call those moments of illumination or epiphanies. Okay, this is an important thing. And there are flashes, flashes of memory. There is no clear, well directed action. Okay, there are only flashes or moments of illumination, और जिसको epiphanies भी कहा जाता है. So then the story does not have a definite ending. The end is also open-ended, okay, without any conclusive end. So uh, it is left to the imagination of the reader. Then the focus here remains on the mind of the characters. So it is more psychological in nature, so that they convey their impression, feelings, and sensations without any interpretation. Okay, so outward action is very limited. So this is the difference between the plot of a traditional story and a modern story. Now we'll discuss characters. Characters, same two type of characters as we discussed in the novel also. Flat characters who are simple, who are just types. They are they represent only types. They do not undergo any change uh, during the progress of the action, right? While round characters are complex, they look more real, and characters can be animals, fairies, ghosts, or even gods, but they speak like human beings and behave like us. And then the traditional writer describes characters from outside. That he tells us that this person is like this. So that is how the traditional story writer characterizes, right? On the other hand, modern writer, does not tell about his characters in the traditional sense. Rather, he shows their physical or mental action. He does not tell anything about the characters. So the characters are, developed through their physical or psychological actions. So this is the difference between the modern stories and the traditional ones. Then point of view means who is telling the story, right? So point of view, the stories sometimes may be told by the one character, the main character in the story. So you will use first person pronoun, that is I. So that is first person point of view. Or it may be the narrator who is present in the story always to comment on the character or situation or events. That is known as the omniscient narrator. So here author himself or herself may comment on the characters. So he will use a third person pronoun, that is he or she, right? But in many other ways of narration are used by the modernist writers, which are quite complex. Okay, so we have finished. So let's have a quick revision. First is a story is a brief work of fiction. Second, it has characters, plot, and setting just like a novel. Then it is narrated from a particular point of view. It may be first person, that is the character himself telling the story in first person, I, but maybe an omniscient narrator, the writer of the story himself, available for comments during the course of events. So he comments on various occasions. So it uses the third person narrative. Or it may be another character who is the voice of the narrator in the story, right? Then we have basically two types of stories, as we had two types of novels. Basically, stories of incident, which focus on the event, which focuses on the events or incidents. Character is secondary, while there are stories of character which focus mainly on the character. So here incident or event becomes secondary. Then in types of stories are based on their theme. So there are realistic stories which are based on realistic themes or realistic issues. Romantic, which are set in a remote and imaginative world. Basically, boy meets the girl kind of formula. They may be romantic or adventurous stories. Then supernatural, which has supernatural setting, supernatural characters, ghosts, fairies, gods, right? uh, things like that. Then adventure, these stories, they focus on the adventure of some character. So here the focus is not the adventure, the who is on a this character is on a special mission, or he is to go and find someone who is lost or something, and the hurdles that come his or her way, and how he or she overcomes them. So there is adventure stories. Then detective, where the spy kind of attitude of the character, where you unearth a murder or a robbery. So that is detective stories. Mysteries, which are full of mystery, how it happened. Or then there are postmodernist stories, which are very different from the traditional ones. They barely have a plot, and characterization is also in flashes. Then story does not tell everything like the novel, because the scope of the story is very limited, so it concentrates on a single theme intensely. Okay. Then the postmodern stories, the modern stories, they are basically psychological in nature, and so they focus on the mental process or mental action of their characters. So that's all about this topic. Hope you